Students, in this video we find the difference of days between two dates. The purpose is this: write a program to find the difference of days between two dates input by the user. The dates are in the following format only: dd-mm-yy-yy. Okay. uh, Let us consider a few examples. Suppose the date 1 happens to be 5th of January 2020 and the date 2 is input as 7th of January 2020. Then clearly the difference between these two dates is only 2 days. Second example, suppose that the first date is 5 January 2020 and the date 2 is 7th of February 2020. Then the difference between these two dates is 33 days. This is the output we want from the program. Now next consider the example where date happens to be 5 January 2020 and date 2 happens to be 7th of January 2021. Then in this case the difference between these two dates will be 368 days. We want to calculate the difference in days as in these examples. Before going further in this video, you can pause here and try to think how can this problem be solved. Before looking at the program, we want to discuss a few points. First of all, we have already discussed a program which to find day of year of a date. That means given a date, it finds which day number of the year that date happens to be. For example, 5th January 2020 will be the day number 5 of the year. Okay, we have written a program which will find the day number for any given date. In an earlier video we have discussed that program. Now the same program is used here and it is a little modified and extended to find the difference of days between two dates. Now the logic of the program is such that we first of all compare and set dates. See, the user may provide input in a little reverse sense. That means it may the user may provide this date 7th of January first and the second date as a 5th of January. Okay, so user that means to say that user need not necessarily provide date 1 as the earlier date and date 2 as the later date. Okay, if the dates are reversed by the user then also our program should be able to handle it and find the difference of dates. That's why we first compare the two dates and swap them if necessary. Okay, so this is the step A: compare and set dates. Date 1 should be the earlier date and date 2 should be the later date. After this comparison of dates and swapping them if necessary, then we come to step B, in which we find the difference between the two dates. See, two cases may arise here. First, when years are different. If the dates are such that they happen to be in two different years, then how do we calculate the difference of dates? For this, what we do is we first calculate the remaining days of date 1's year. Okay, the first date, the earlier date, we find first the remaining days of that year in which date 1 falls. Okay, and then we add to that all the days of years in between the 2 years. Imagine first date happens to be in the year 2020 and the second date happens to be in 2025. Then we have to add all the days of the years 2021, 22, 23 and 24, right? And after that we add day number of year of date 2. Then we find which day of the year the date 2 happens to be. That function we have already discussed, we have done, we have available that function to find the day number. And so we will add this quantity. Okay, so when the years are different, the difference in days between the two dates will be found by calculating three quantities. First, the remaining days of date 1's year, the then all the days of years in between the two dates, and day number of year of date 2. Okay, or we may say, uh, we may rephrase it in this way, that see, how do we find the remaining days of date 1's year? We find it by, first we calculate total days of year of date 1, total days of the year in which date 1 falls, and we subtract from that the day number of year of date 1. Okay, see, we have available the function to find the day number of a particular date in a year. Okay, so we want to use that function. So and it is easy to find the total days of a year. So what we do is, instead of calculating the remaining days of to calculate the remaining days of date 1's year, what we do is subtract the day number of date 1 minus total days of the year in which date 1 falls, and then we have total days of years in between, and the day number of year of date 2. This type of calculation is needed when the years of the two dates are different. Now the second case arises in which years are same. Okay, if two dates happen to be of the same year, then how do we find the difference of days between them? We just subtract the day number of date 1 in the year from the day number of date 2 in that year. Okay, it is as simple as that. Now let us look at the program. We have already looked at all these functions: is leap year, find a day of year. Already these functions are discussed in previous videos. Now what we needed to look at is the new functions which are written for this program. So these three functions are written for this program. The first one is compare and swap. Okay, so compare and swap function is needed when the user inputs the dates in reverse order, so that we can swap the two dates, so that we have date 1 as the earlier date and the date 2 as the later date. Now how do we do it? We need 6 parameters: day 1, month 1, year 1, and day 2, month 2, year 2. These three quantities represent the first date, and these three quantities represent the second date. Okay, now how do we determine if the user has input the later date as date 1? How do we determine it? We first compare year 1. We first see if year 1 happens to be year 2. Okay, suppose the user has input as the first date a date in the year 2025, and a date of 2020 in date 1. Then clearly suppose the user has input 2025 in date 1 and 2020 in date 2, then obviously year 1 will be greater than year 2, because 25 is greater than 20. So in that case, we have determined that user has input the dates in reverse order. So what we do is we decide that the dates need to be swapped. Similarly, the other case arises when year 1 and year 2 are same, that both of the dates are from the same year, but month 1 happens to be greater than month 2. Suppose the first date is from month 12 and the second date is from month 8, then clearly the date 1 is the later date and date 2 is the earlier date, but we want to swap them now. So in this situation also we will swap the two dates. And similarly, in the third case, if year 1 and year 2 are same, and month 1 and month 2 are also same, but day 1 happens to be greater than day 2, okay, in that case also we will need to swap them, swap the two dates. Now how do we swap the two dates? Look closely at this statement. We are returning two tuples here, okay. The first tuples is day 2 comma month 2 comma year 2, and the second tuple is day 1 comma month 1 comma year 1. Okay, so what's happening here is that we are returning the two dates. We are just returning the two dates, but in a reverse order. We are first returning the second date input by the user, and then we are returning the first date input by the user. Um, Input by the user. Otherwise means when this condition fails, that means none of these three conditions are met. That means the dates input by the user are in proper order. The earlier date has been input as date 1, and the later date has been input as date 2. Then we just return the normal dates. That means date 1 is in returned first, and date 2 is returned second. Okay, so this function will be used to reverse the order of dates. Okay, see, when this function is called, here, look here, when this function is called, how does it actually swap it? We'll understand when we look at when this function is actually used. See what we are doing here. We are calling this function compare and swap here. Okay, we are passing the 6 parameters: day 1 month 1 year 1, and day 2 month 2 year 2 here. Okay, now how do we capture the return values, the two tuples which are returned by this function? We write the two tuples here to accept the return tuples. Okay, the first tuple happens to be the day 1 month 1 year 1, and the second tuple happens to be the day 2 month 2 year 2. That means that if the function is returning as we saw here, if the function returns day 2 month 2 year 2 first, and day 1 month 1 year 1 first, then date 2 will be stored in day 1 month 1 year 1, and date 1 will be stored in day 2 month 2 year 2. So in this way the two dates are swapped. Okay, but if the dates are in proper order, then we just return day 1 month 1 year 1 and day 2 month 2 year 2. So the dates are not reversed, they just go in their original variables only. Okay, so this is how this compare and swap function works. Now now we look once. Okay, so this is all about this compare and swap function. Now next we look at another function which finds the total number of days in a year. Okay, so this function takes an argument a year which is integer, and it finds the total number of days in that year. First is for this it just needs to know whether the year is a leap year, because a leap year has 366 days, and a year which is not leap has 365 days. So if it calls a function is leap year, which has been discussed in earlier videos, and this function tells if the year is a leap year. If it is true that it is a leap year, then this function returns 366 as the number of days in the year. Otherwise means when the year is not a leap year, this function returns 365 as the total days in the year. Okay, now we come to this function difference in dates. Okay, this is the function which actually computes the difference in dates between the two dates input by the user. So what it does is it takes two arguments, date 1 and date 2, which are string type dates. Okay, in the format dd-mm-yy. Now how does it do it? See, first of all, it extracts the day, month and year parts from date 1, and date, month and year parts from date 2. and assign them to day 1 month 1 year 1 and day 2 month 2 year 2 variables respectively. Okay, for this it uses a function get day month year. This function we have discussed in earlier videos, we are not going to discuss it again. So this function takes a string type date as argument and returns three integers. It returns three integers which represent day, month and year of the date and so this is how day, month and year are obtained in a numerical form by this function. Next, what we do, we check the validity of the two dates. So see, if the dates are not valid, then there is no point in going ahead with the computations of finding the difference between the two dates. So what we do is use a function named isDateValid. Again, this function has been discussed in previous videos, so we'll not discuss it here again. So what this function does is it takes a date in the form of three integer arguments representing day, month, year, and it checks whether this date is proper, is it valid. So if the date is valid, it returns true, and if it is invalid, it returns false. So this function is called for both the dates with date 1 and date 2. This function is called with both the dates, and if for any of these it returns false, that means input is not proper and we return -1. Okay, if any of the two dates is not proper, then we return -1 as the difference in dates. Okay, we are returning -1 as the difference in dates, which is actually an error signal. Okay, so whoever calls this function will know by this value -1 that there was an error in the input. So the input has to be taken again. Okay, so minus value is returned as an error signal. Now if that does not happen, then we will be executing this instruction. Okay, if the two dates are proper, then this return -1 statement will not be executed, and we will come to this statement. And what do we do in this statement? As we compare and swap the two dates in this statement, which we have already discussed how that is done, and day 1 month 1 year 1 gets the values for the earlier date, and day 2 month 2 year 2 gets the values for the later date. No matter how the user actually input the two dates, the user may have input the later date as the first date and the earlier date as the second date, but this function compare and swap will compare them and swap them if necessary by this arrangement of return values and accepting values. Now after this has been done, now we are sure that the day 1 month 1 year 1 represent the earlier date, and day 2 month 2 year 2 represent the later date. Now we can go ahead with finding actually the difference between the two dates. Now to find the difference of days between the two dates, we first of all check whether the two dates happen to belong to the same year. In that case, this condition will be true: year 1 is equal to year 2. And in this case, we will simply find the difference of dates by using the function find day of year on date 1 and subtracting that. See, we are subtracting it here, minus is on here, from the day number of year for date 2. Okay, see, this function find a day of year has already been discussed in previous videos, so we will not discuss it again here. So what this function does is it takes as input a date in the form of three integers representing day, month and year, and it finds which day number in the year that date happens to be. For example, if the date is 5 January 2020, then it will be the day number 5 of the year. Okay, so what we do is to use that function and find the day number for date 2 and then subtract from it the day number of date 1, and that will be our answer of the problem, that what is the difference between the two dates, and it is being stored in a variable named diff days, okay, which will be returned. And but if that doesn't happen to be true, that means if this condition is not true, that is the two dates don't belong to the same year, then we come to the else part. Okay, what happens in the else part? See, we first calculate the difference in days. We start to compute actually the difference in days with first putting the value total days in year of year 1 and subtracting day number of a year for day 1. That is, we are actually putting the value remaining days of year for date 1. Remaining days of the year in which date 1 occurs, we are computing uh, by subtracting the day number of year for date 1 from the total number of days of year 1. Okay, so total days in a year, we have discussed this function a little while ago in this video only, and that will return us the total number of days, which will be 366 if the year is a leap year, otherwise it will be 365, and from that we will subtract the day number of the year for date 1. Okay, we will first put this value in this as per the logic of the program we discussed before starting the program. Now after this, we need to add all the days of the intermediate years. For example, if date 1 happens to be 2020 and date 2 happens to be 2025, then we need to add all the days of the years 21, 22, 23 and 24. That we do using this for loop here. That we do using this for loop here for YR in range year 1 plus 1 comma year 2. See, look closely at this loop. We are providing the starting value as year 1 plus 1. That means the year after the year of date 1, and we stop before year 2. So if year 1 happens to be 2020, then we will be starting with 2021. That will be the first value assigned to the variable year. Okay, and what will be the last value? It will be 2024. Okay, so we are processing the intermediate years between the two dates with this loop. These values will be assigned to the variable loop variable YR. Okay, so the YR will get 2021 as the first value and 2024 as the last value. So now what do we do with this with these values of years in the variable YR? See, what we do is find the total days of year, excuse me, uh, for this we just use this function total days in year, which we used earlier also, uh, and pass the value of YR argument in that, and so that we will get the total number of days in that year. See, there was a little mistake here. Off was written and I have changed it to in now, because the function name is total days in year, and was earlier it was written total days of year, which was a mistake, and I have corrected it now. So function name is total days in year. Okay, so we are doing nothing here except getting the total number of days for each of the intermediate years and adding it to the diff days variable. Okay, the diff days variable started from here, and now we have added all the days of all the intermediate years. Look at this plus equal to operator, it adds something to this diff days variable. Okay, now after this loop, see, there is only one statement in this loop. This is decided by the indentation level difference, that you should always keep in mind. And this statement, it has the same indentation as this for four keyword. So this is not inside this loop, this is outside the loop. So after this loop ends, all the days of intermediate years have been added to diff days, and what we do next is we add something more, that is the day number of the year of for date 2. We find that using this function find day of year, which we have discussed. So see, after adding, first of all uh, we have found the remaining days of date 1's year. Then we have added all the intermediate years, all the days, and then we are adding the day number of year for date 2. Okay, first we found the remaining days of date 1, then we added all the days of all the intermediate years between the two dates, and then we added the day number of date 2 in the year. Okay, this completes our calculation of difference of days in this else part. uh, what does else part belongs to? This else part relates to the case when the two dates happen to belong to different years. Okay, when they belong to the same year, we calculated the difference of days simply by subtracting the day number of date 1 minus day number of date 2. Okay, but this else part belongs to the case when the two dates are not in the same year. Okay, and after completing this calculation of difference of days, we just return this value. That is what this function is supposed to return, difference in dates. Okay, now we come to the main program. The main program simply takes the two dates as input with the input function, and the messages are enter first date in DTMMYY format, and the date 2 is input with the message enter second date DTMMYY. Okay, the user may input the dates in any order. The user may actually input the later date as the first date and the earlier date as the second date, but our program will still process them correctly, because we have a compare and swap function which will swap them if the dates are actually input in reverse order by the user. So next we use this function difference in dates and pass the two dates in string form, which are in date 1 and date 2 variables, and pass it to this function difference in dates, which returns the difference, which we store in the variable named diff. Okay, now remember that this function difference in dates returns -1 when the two dates are not valid. Any of the two dates are not valid, then this function returns -1. So we have to see that if the dates were valid or not. So what we do is we compare the return value, which is stored in diff variable, with -1, and if that happens to be true, then we just print invalid input, so that the user will get to know that the dates input by him or her were invalid. Else part belongs to the case when return value was not -1, and actually the difference of two dates is being returned. Then we just print difference equal to diff days. Okay, diff is the variable whose value will be returned by this function. So the user will get the proper message that the two dates have so many days of difference. That's all about this program. Thank you.